Okay. Hello, Frank.
Hello, Johann.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming today, for agreeing. We talk about a common pet topic of us, refactoring, or I think you called it reshaping.
Different names for that because sometimes you need to have different names for that.
So before we start, a little bit of the background. We both worked at the Audibene org, or here.com org. Like, how many users does it have today, the org?
Something around 1,000.
1,000. And it's about 5 to 10 years old now. How old is it?
Directly 9 years. Yeah, absolutely.
9 years. And 9 years the same org.
9 years, the same word. Growing,
Nice.
growing, growing. And
I still
we grew from some few hundred to 1,000.
Nice. I still remember when we discussed greenfield versus brownfield, and we agreed on brownfield and refactoring. So, first question is, why did we back then decide on brownfield and not to build a new org? Because maybe the people what was the situation when we had this discussion, Frank?
Yeah, what was the situation? As you know how it is. We were the team of one or two admins in it, a product owner, two developers, business, and let's say the company was on the growth path. So for this kind of thing that every month the revenue must increase, and it was necessary to do this. And so far there was no time to sit back and think about, okay, how it should be, and doing projects for months before the new org is ready. It was necessary that we keep the current org alive, that we develop the current org furthermore, and do something strategical and to extend it. And so far it was fully clear, okay, we have to do this while the org is running and not just having a code freeze for 6 months and then proceeding. So for this kind of situation it was.
So actually, brownfield was the almost more low. It fit better into the business model of continuous growth because we couldn't stop the growth
Exactly.
and the new features.
Exactly, and we didn't have the capacity to handle both, right? So for greenfield and keeping the current org running, and so far we decided, as the same person who are running the org needs to modify the org, we decided for the brownfield approach.
Yeah, yeah, I still remember, and it felt very strange at first, but I have to agree it was a good learning. So we talked about it after in the last 3 years. We had like three different. You had the first was the cleanup. The second, it was a refactoring, and the last one today, you just are in the middle of it. It's a reshaping, correct? Something there.
Yeah, let's say different names for different things. So for the first thing, what you mentioned is, let's say the typical thing. What happened? The org is growing. You implement things here and there, and you also remember when we've started, just workflows were there. Then process builders was introduced by Salesforce. Then flows were coming in, and so for over the time we adopted the implementation parts, but of course the legacy was still there, right? And so for the first yeah, let's say cleanup, what we did was we just looked into organs, was throwing away everything what is not necessary anymore. Because let's say typical problem, what I think everyone knows is when is experiencing in their careers, business colleagues often ask for new features again, but no one is coming to your desk and say, okay, do remove this kind of feature we have requested 2 years ago because we do not need it anymore or we do not use it anymore. And so for the first thing, what we did was a cleanup. Look, really taking the time, think about, okay, is this kind of workflow still necessary? Is this task creation still necessary? And so for just by cleaning up the org, we removed so much that it felt like the org was refactored.
So you say, I think I still remember the discussion because we discussed a lot. Should we start with the infamous quote trigger? Which was this was the biggest trigger I've ever seen, the biggest class, the quote handler. Or should we start with this cleanup? Why did we decide on the cleanup?
Yeah, because let's say um, cleanup is low-hanging fruits, right? And especially on the configuration part, cleanups is most likely low-hanging fruits. Invalid validation rules, which are costing you time for whenever they executed. Workflows, which are checking constantly if they should run or not. All these kind of things are time-consuming. And so for our limits, we hit it in that kind of time was that Salesforce felt slow whenever you save records. And so far we looked into it and we saw that flow execution, process build execution, such kind of things took time. And by removing this kind of unnecessary steps, you do not need to think about testing things, thinking about side effects and all those kind of things, because we just took out simple automations. And so for if you removed 50 simple automations, then you see an effect on the database execution, right? And so forth, that's it.
So you would say the takeaway there is start with the low-hanging fruits.
Of course, let's say this is the most, how to say this, is the most exciting things, because let's say you see direct effects, right? So far you see that when all of us receive this kind of messages, how far you are in regards of your SOQL statement. So far you used 98 out of 100, right? And so for if you then remove 3 things and you see that you just now only it takes only 90 requests instead of 100, so far then you see, okay, positive effect already, business is much more stable, and so far you get the result, the positive result out very, very fast. Let's say at least for this kind of old-fashioned orgs, but we had, if the org is just 2 years old, then I think the effect of taking out legacy is not as big as it was for us, where the org was already 6 or 7 years old when we have started this. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So I think this is almost an eye opener for all people listening out there, is because I, as far as I remember, at least I had the tendency to go to the complex stuff first, to the quote trigger and refactoring the data model.
Of course, you have to, yeah. So for low-hanging fruits are low-hanging fruits. That's it. And then the next steps are coming. Then you need to check, okay, what is time consuming for you? And so for you're right. Then we looked into some triggers and even refactored some triggers here and there. But also there, how to say, we did it, but even there we learned how to do things better. And let's say all of us have heard about enterprise patterns and such kind of approaches. And at that point of time, we weren't ready for this, let's say it that way. So far, we refactored it with our best knowledge. But what typically happens is you add features, and then a statement is added, then a DML statement is added, and then after a while you figure out, oh, you could combine the previous feature with the new feature, and so far save some statements here and there. And so far, this was then our refactoring to, let's say, to how to say this, to summarize or to bring in or to streamline the trigger what we have built over time into one trigger as it looks like that it was built once, yeah. So far, and not just feature edit, especially when you have external agency working on it, or younger colleagues, they often tend to just build a separate module with their own statements, with their own socket statements, with their own DML statements, and put it beside your existing logic and not checking if there is already something where they could attach to. And so far, we had this kind of situation that such kind of things happened, and so far we are summarized it and downsized it to one trigger with the most optimal socket and DML statements in that kind of moment.
Yeah,
So
but you only did it for a few select objects instead.
exactly.
We had like 50 objects we used more or less, but we only did it for how many objects? Like,
yeah, it was just for 2 or 3 so far we did this, because let's say it was also time consuming, and also only there we had the limit issues. And so for even in that kind of situation, you know how it was. The business is still requesting for new features, is still requesting for optimizing the business processes, automating even furthermore. And so far, let's say as the system was running, it was all the time also the request, why should we refactor, right? And so far, you need to balance it out to deliver new features versus doing refactoring things. And so far, we focused on the 3 most important objects there at that point of time.
how did we decide? How did you decide on the most important objects?
Very, very easy, right? So far, we looked into the limits which are breaking. So far, you have the typical current long-running epics limits reached by specific objects, or whenever you worked on specific objects, or you have the epic CPU timeout error messages floating your inbox. And so for, let's say, this was the main reason to prevent it. Main, how to say this, the main focus we looked into was, we have to make sure that our Salesforce users can work with the system and do not repeat the entering the data and such kind of things. So far, the flawless Salesforce system usage was the main purpose of this kind of refactoring, to make sure that the end user is not affected by errors within the system. And so far, then we looked into it, and then we saw, okay, the most errors are happening for these kind of 3 objects. And so far, then, we touched these objects and removed these kind of errors.
So the refactoring was never a goal in itself.
No, of course not. Yeah, so far that's never. Whatever we do, there needs to be a business value behind, right? And so far, if everything works, um, let's say just doing refactoring because you have learned a new um a new phrase or a new method and just want to try it out. If you are the lucky one who has this kind of time, then congratulations. But I have never seen this so far. Refactoring was just for when there's a business need in there, and so for otherwise, never. Also, when you run this kind of big systems, you know it, never change a running system, right? So for why you would touch something where you know this is working since years, if it is working, if this is scaling, if this is producing no errors, yeah, maybe you could build it a little bit better, but you can spend your time for much valuable things than just rebuilding what is already there and what is working.
Yeah, this is a very good point because I think for me, for example, as an architect, I would of course like to architect everything according to best practices, and then you always want to shouldn't be cleaned it up at some point, but you say always ask, it does it have an impact on the user?
Of course, yeah. So far, that's it. And let's say you remember, maybe we had this kind of typical phrase whenever we prioritized our work, we clustered our work and must have, could have, and there was also time this kind of at one point of time we would like to do, right? And so far, this kind of would like to do's, of course we skip them after some weeks because would like to do's you never do because you often have to do the must have to do or the urgent things, right? And the refactoring just to make the code looking nicer. And if this is the only purpose of doing it, then it's a would like to do. If you do this in your free time, in your spare time, do it. I think no company is having saying something against it, but this is not bringing business value. The business value must be that it's faster, that it's easier maintainable, that you can develop faster or something like that. So for this, you need to bring in, yeah. And it's often also then if you look at the companies using Salesforce, they can produce the most business value. It's most often on the customer side or on the Salesforce user side, but not on the Salesforce developer side because normally you have what is the normal average? One Salesforce admin, one Salesforce developer to in comparison to 100 users. So for if you make the 100 users 5 minutes faster a day versus you make the developer 5 minutes faster per day in development, then I think the value is obviously on the customer or on the Salesforce user side and not on the developer side.
I never thought about it. You're 100% right. Even if the Salesforce developer is expensive, but it's still never 100 times more expensive than
100 Salesforce users are mostly most likely more expensive than one developer. Yeah.
Okay, so it's never about okay. So this was the first cleanup. I was part of that. I loved it. This was my favorite thing. One thing, I remember, we removed a lot of unused field. You remember us hitting the opportunity field limit several times.
Of course.
You have done you removing unused field. You have been removing fields for the last 15 years. What's your strategy, Frank, to identify them and then how to remove them?
Yeah, so far you can do different things, right? So for the most obvious thing is there are Epic Change apps like Field Trip, and there are much more such kind of common apps where you can check and can create reports out of it if this field is filled or something like that. You even do not you need to use such kind of fields just for the main objects you have in place, create reports and check if these kind of fields are filled. And that's one of the first thing. The problem with these kind of fields is for text field and number fields, this works very well, but for fields with default values, you will not figure out what it is so far. Then the second thing is check all fields with default field values and check for what is the percentage of fields with default values versus change values. And if you're nearly by 100%, then really request together with the business colleagues, is this field still necessary, yes or no? Then what you also can do is you have a lot of tools right now outside where you can compare if the fields are on page layouts, yes or no. And so far, if the fields are accessible or not. And so far, you can request yourself and the business colleagues if you figure out that out of 800 fields, you have 400 are not on page layouts, then really request, okay, what are the purpose of these kind of 400 fields not being presented to the Salesforce users? Maybe you need some of them for integrations to other systems, totally fine. But most likely with this kind of thing, you will figure out fields you do not use, which are maybe then used in the past, but not there anymore.
So again, you come back to your guiding North Star, the user. If the user has no access to the field, it's likely.
In the end, to be honest, for whom we are building the Salesforce system?
Of course, for Salesforce admins, always no.
Yes, of course, if you do it well, you even have an admin interface within Salesforce for yourself, but most likely it is for your Salesforce users or for your end customers, right? So for whoever is your customer. But I think this is the most important thing. Figure out who's your customer and for whom you're working for. Salesforce is, I know I do not like to say that, but Salesforce is just a tool to fulfill business requirements, right? That's it. And so far, it's a tool we have chosen to take to fulfill this. But even if this is making fun, it's never about the fun of the Salesforce developer or admin to do so. It is the customer or the customer consultant or the sales agent or the Salesforce user, whoever it is, yeah, which kind of team they are.
Okay, so now let's say we identified 300 fields which are unused. How did you go about it? How do you remove them from the system? Because removing a field, I mean, it's almost impossible.
It's not impossible, right? So far you can do it, but in the end you have two strategies. It's a little bit about how risk averse you are and how not. What we have done is most likely because for some fields you can never figure out who's using this because maybe the colleague who was requesting this kind of field in the past is not there anymore. Maybe your user base is so big that you cannot ask everyone. A very, very nice trick we did is we just took away the read access to this kind of field. And so far in that moment, if the field is necessary for some business processes, you will figure it out very, very fast because someone will come to you and complain about that the process is not working anymore. And then you know, okay, this is this kind of field. So for, of course, do not do this with 300 fields at once. So for switch off 5 fields and then wait 1-2 days before you process the next 5 fields. But with this kind of things, you can easily figure out what are the fields which are still in use, what are not. So for, of course, really check before you do this because let's say for 1 or 2 fields the company will say, okay, this was a nice approach. If you have 300 fields and you switch all of them off and 290 are still in use, then your previous investigation was maybe not as successful. And so far, then you should think about to do it better next time. But in the end, this is the way. So for first, hide the fields before you delete them, because unhiding a field is much more easy than to redeploy the fields and to do the data remigration, right? And so for hiding the fields is the most easiest step here you can do.
From personal experience, never undelete a field that is referenced in a lead conversion mapping. Never. I broke Salesforce with that. You literally can break Salesforce by undeleting fields. So never undelete a field. Yeah, okay. So if I do it less risky, this was the risky move, but I think many people work in enterprise context or in in more risk averse context. How do you do it with less risky, Frank?
Yeah, in the end, then it is all about communication, right? So far, you need to list down all these kind of fields, inform your stakeholders about it, make the workshops about it, check all the processes you have documented about this kind of fields, talk with the other tech teams who have integrations to Salesforce to check if they are using this kind of fields. Then it's the effort on your side to really make sure that you have really ask everyone about this kind of field to figure out if this is in use or not.
So removing a field becomes a project in itself. So coming back, I should only do that if absolutely necessary and not for the sake of it. If it's that much effort.
It is like cleaning the room, right? So for you can say, okay, you just will clean your room when it's absolutely necessary. I think this is what my teenager son is telling me right now. So for as grown-up adults, we all know that cleaning up regularly is a good practice. So far, it's on you when you do this in your org. No?
This is a good question. Hey, before we go into the bigger refactoring project, what about cleaning up regularly? We talked Frank? I mean, we all dream of the org that's always clean.
Yeah, of course, let's say ever. And a dream is called a dream because it's a dream, right? And becoming reality is then making it really, really hard. I think it depends to the company culture, it depends to yourself, it depends to your own discipline. It also depends to the stress level you may have. Honestly speaking, in my career, I try to develop as clean as possible, so far that I do not need to clean up afterwards. But cleaning up the org and keeping it clean over time is really, really hard because, to be honest, I have never seen that business stakeholders requesting new features were coming to my desk and asking for, hey, Frank, 2 years ago I have requested this kind of feature. Right now I'm not using it anymore. So far you can remove it. Yeah. So for often you figure out legacy by incident that you figure out, oh, this is not in use anymore. Thank you for informing me. Yeah, and or that people ask for, hey, why is this kind of task still created? We train our sales agents since 1.5 years not to use it anymore. So far, then you figure out that you have automations in the system which are not used. So far, that means if you can do it, is this reality? Is this possible? The majority of the companies I know, they're the focus of the resource allocation is much more on building new features and new automations than doing cleanups and refactoring of the org. So far, that's the reality. It is what it is. I know that there are a lot of books outside who are praying for to do it differently. Even I've read the books. Even if you make yourself the New Year's wishes for, okay, this year I will start doing it. For me, within 15 years of doing Salesforce, it never worked out.
I only oil my bike if it starts to creak. I should do it regularly, I know. Then some people do it after every winter, but I only do it if it starts to creak. Yeah, I get your point. So it's also something we should just accept as a matter of life, that because it's never clean anyway. There is not something like a clean org, because something that's clean today is unclean tomorrow.
It happens here and there. I think it depends a little bit on the discipline. If you work alone, then it's much more easier to keep it clean than if you work with teams. With teams, it is about the team culture and how you define it together with the team. What is their way of working? What is their methodology use? What is the documentation methodology, the implementation methodology, and such kind of things, and then you can keep your org still clean. But to be honest, wherever people are working with it, everyone will bring in their individual, let's say, spirit into it. And so far, over the time, it will look like that things are not as clean as before. And so far, that's human nature.
That's okay. So, but why we are together today is you started a big reshaping project recently.
Yes, did it. So far.
Did you finish?
No. Not we are 1/3 is done, let's say it that way. So far, yeah, we named it reshaping at that kind of moment because let's say we have used refactoring here and there for a lot of things. You know that even Salesforce is forcing you to do refactor. First, they have switched off and deprecated the workflows, right? Then they have deprecated the process builders. So far, out of the history, we were coming from 600 workflows, right? We refactored them into process builders as much as we could. And so for only 150 workflows left over, right now where the workflows were deprecated, we need to refactor them into flows and then also this kind of process builders into flows. And even with that kind of things, unfortunately, there are some tweaks also in the flows. We even sometimes need to rethink if we will do this then within epics instead of flows. For example, unfortunately, you can't have subflows for before insert update flows, especially when they're invoked by platform events. And so far, our before insert update flows would explode as big monsters because we cannot separate them into subflows, right? And so far, we decide, okay, that means whatever is before insert update has to go into epics, unfortunately, to keep our org clean. Yeah, so far that's and maintainable. But everything else works really well to do this via data migration. So far, that's one part. And the other part was then after years, we reached more and more limits of Epic CPU timeout limits, DB DB consumption. So far, Salesforce was telling us that we use the DB too much. Then also concurrent long-running Apex errors popped up. Then also a lot of roll-log errors we see. So for all the issues you can see and you can have whenever you have, let's say, big data and fast processing data in Salesforce, we see, and of course we know where it was coming from. It is about the code base, how it was. And yeah, so far we started this kind of refactoring project to really touch everything right now. And now we are really talking about not directly enterprise pattern framework, but a very similar. So for really segregation of concern in the code base. So for DML statements are separated, socket statements are separated, the functionality itself are separated in the methods. And also beside that, we have an multi-org. I don't know, we have a single org with multi-country approach, right? And so far we even implemented a country dispatcher to make sure that the country or a user within a country is just executing the code base which is necessary for this kind of specific country. And so for how it is normally, how you implemented the things in Salesforce, it's this kind of big change of if then else simplified. Yeah. So and so far, whatever we have implemented, it was okay for opportunity, for example, in the after update trigger, do following things. And if it is a country XYZ, then do this. And if it's a country XYZ, then also additional to do this. Because in the beginning, the countries were very similar. And so far, the if statements were just exceptions. But over the time, it turned around. And so far, not 80% was similar and 20% was exceptions. It's vice versa. 20% was similar and 80% was exceptions. But of course, with this kind of if then else chain, that means whenever you saved an opportunity, and no matter in which country, it was first checked all the different exceptions for the countries. Even if it's not executed, this is taking time, right? And with the country dispatcher and this kind of trigger separation into different modules, and we make sure that we have a global function running first, doing all those kind of things, and then checking for which country I should run, and then just only executing the modules and classes for this kind of specific country. And so for that means that for the country itself, from their effort of execution, it looks like that it's a single org for this kind of specific country. And so far, that's a really nice approach. But of course, that really requires that we really need to touch every line of code we have ever written in this kind of trigger and have to refactor them into the right modules.
But again, it's almost like a low-hanging fruit by being, yes, a lot of work, but it doesn't sound complex. The outcome is exactly the same as before, isn't it?
Yes and no. Of course, let's say we also look into it. Okay, do we really need this furthermore? Because let's say
you do again cleaning.
Yeah. So of course, you do cleaning, right? Because let's say it is not worth to touch code where you directly know, okay, this is a feature from 6 years ago, no one is using anymore. So far,
I want to stop you there. So you say cleaning is every refactoring project starts with cleaning.
Yeah, let's say in this moment we do not start with that, but in the moment we touch something to refactor, the first question is can we delete this or do we need to refactor this? And so far, then it is.
So you never blindly refactor anything.
No,
it always
no.
is.
Exactly. And so far, let's say we try to answer this kind of question within 5 to 10 minutes. Can we clean this or do we need to refactor this? So far, we do not do this kind of 2 months investigation of a method if it needs to be there. So far, if it's obvious that it's not necessary anymore, because let's say the tasks were created, but since 2 years no one closed these kind of tasks, then it's obvious that no one is needing this, and then we delete it, right?
Or so we had an automation which automatically deleted the tasks.
Something like that. And so far, then we take it out. Because let's say this is saving then development time, right? And if someone is missing then afterwards, then you can refactor it still, because let's say the original code base is still there. So far nothing is lost, right? So far you will figure out later, and at the QA step, you will figure out if you have missed something or not. So far, yeah.
This all only works if you have a proper development pipeline, correct, Frank? Which we
Yeah, of course, you need to know. Yeah, so for it is like a normal software development project. Yeah, absolutely. So for it is we have the tickets in place, we have the instructions in place, the dailies in place, the development pipeline in place. We follow the word is missing right now. The deployment pipeline project. So far, it doesn't look different than any other software project. If we would build a new feature or not, it's exactly the same. So far, there is no difference for the developers.
This is a really yeah. This is. I think looking at that, what I just took away from you is refactoring is nothing else but another. It's not this magic big beast which you do. But you clean up, you identify low-hanging fruits, and usually that's enough. Did you ever have to do anything else but low-hanging fruits?
No,
It's always low-hanging fruits.
Yeah, of course. Let's say because the effect is if you start doing it, then it becomes like every other software project, right? You need to think about it a little bit, you need to investigate a little bit, you need to plan a little bit, and then you need to execute on it. And so for that's it. But of course, let's say you can never plan all those kind of things, or I would never plan everything accordingly, like in a waterfall model, and then say, okay, it will take right now these other 250 user stories and these other 2,500 modules we have to build and such kind of things. No, we took the first object and then we started, then we assigned resources to it, and then we saw, okay, what is the velocity for that? And then we figured out, okay, that means we will take this kind of amount of time for this kind of specific action for this kind of specific object. And so forth. Then we decided, okay, do we need to assign developer more, a developer less? Can we do something in parallel? So for it's agile software development. That's it. It's just the business request is something else, right? So for right now, the business request is make sure that these kind of errors are not popping up anymore.
This was my last question. How do you convince business? So you actually didn't convince. Business asked you, or business had a problem and you said the answer is refactoring. How does it work?
Let's say this is a little bit difficult, right? And so I think everyone knows it. As an admin, as a developer, you see it coming that you need to do refactoring because let's say errors are popping up more and more and more. Users are starting complaining more and more and more over time. And then, of course, what it is, at first we try to implement a quick fix to make sure that the end users can work and such kind of things. But if you do this for years and just implementing quick fixes at some point of time, you cannot implement a quick fix anymore, right? Because then you're out of possibilities, let's say it that way. And so for whenever I had this, the effect was that I was going to the business and told them, hey, you remember that we had this kind of issues again and again and again, and told them, okay, we need time to refactor this. And then, of course, at first you get back this kind of, hey, this kind of answer, hey, can you quick fix it again like you did the last time? And then maybe one or two times you can do it still. But then at one point of time, you really say, oh, sorry, there is no quick fix anymore. And then, but it needs to be, it must have, we need to win this kind of quarter. So for whatever you have as arguments at sales companies, right? So for the typical thing, sometimes then you got this kind of resource allocation approved before it crashes. Sometimes we need to learn it the hard way, right? And when it crashes, then the people ask for, okay, why it crashes and how to fix it. And then you can say, oh yeah, to fix it, you can use the refactoring for it. But honestly speaking, it should be in our goal and target not to crash the system to convince someone that we should do something, right? So for take your time, prepare it, show them, show the business stakeholders and the colleagues about what would be the effect out of it, come back with what is the business effect out of it, what would happen if the system is not there for 1 or 2 or 3 days because of an issue. And I think then you get them convinced already. Let's say the crashing the system or let the system crash just to convince someone is only the last resort because it's harming our business and it's harming your customers, right? And so far you should never go this way. And so far, whenever you see it coming, whenever you see the errors are piling up more and more and more, start the discussion with the stakeholders. Take into consideration that their main purpose of work, their motivation is something different than for you as a Salesforce admin, and as a developer. So for take a step back, think about what is their motivation, what are the KPIs they are looking at, and try to find the voice and the speech of them to convince them about why you need to reduce the development effort on their features or something like that to have the time to refactor. Huh? But
And so
this is your responsibility to keep the system alive, right? So far.
Yeah. And so lastly, so when they come back and say it's really crashing too much, we have to refactor, you are already prepared, I guess. You already have a plan.
Exactly.
So what's the impact like from a business point of view? You just mentioned it. What has business out of it? Less
what is
bugs.
business?
Does it have less bugs?
Let's say most likely, let's say sometimes you have to live with bugs, right? So far, I think there's no Salesforce org with 0 bugs in it. What has business out of it? It differs. It differs of your values, why you started the refactoring. For whatever we had is, let's say we had bugs because we reached Salesforce limits, right? So far we reached row log errors, we reached the concurrent long-running epics errors, we reached the epic CPU timeout errors and such kind of things. So for users was trying to save records in Salesforce and cannot do this. So far they need to repeat their process steps. So far this is frustrating them. This is slowing down their own processes. And so far the business value then with an error-free system in this kind of regards, then the systems are smooth, the processes are faster, the employees are much more motivated to work with the system. They also trust then the system because let's say the system is doing what they expect them to do. So far the system trust is there already. So for all of these kind of things are little steps which are bringing business value. And then let's say if you do it right, I was most likely working for sales companies, then the effect out of this is that you see a more stable revenue coming in or even revenue increases coming in. Because if you do it then this kind of massive way as we doing it right now, is then the effect out of it that the system is even faster processing the records than it is right now. So far that means you can do more in less time. And yeah.
So even in today's time, where some customers have actually small, limited budgets, you might say it could be even a good investment to reduce cost, put in a refactoring project, do less with more, do more with less.
Let's say if your Salesforce org is the one who's slowing you down in your processes, and this is the feedback from your end users or from your Salesforce users, for example, then it could be really worse to look into it. Okay, do we have possibilities to speed up the data processing within Salesforce to speed up their the Salesforce user processes? Absolutely. Yeah.
And
so far,
coming back to the first cleanup we talk about, as I remember, I mean, we had a org of like 1,000 users. We have been like, how many people who did the cleanup? Maybe 2-3 people. It's not a lot of people. And in 1-2 months, you had a lot of outcome already. It's not an expensive. It's refactoring is actually a rather cheap project, isn't it? Compared to.
Well, it depends on what you're doing. Yeah. So for the way how we do it right now, it's not cheap, but in comparison to the outcome, what you can have them out of it, then it can, let's say in comparison, it's then very, very cheap when you have this kind of effect that you can increase the revenue outcome or when you can improve the performance of a Salesforce user by 10-20%, then over the time, you can easily calculate the ROI of what it took to refactor and to get the refactoring results versus the revenue goals and such kind of things, right? And so far, I think refactoring is worth. Yeah? So far, if the company is in a good shape and the system is slowing you down, then it's absolutely worth to do it.
This is a good point. I think you come back to the business value, and I think we wrap it up with that. Thank you very much, Frank, for the time.
Thank you.
Any last words to our watchers?
So far, not just keep up with all the Salesforce updates. I know it's sometimes hard. So for 15 years ago, when I was starting, it was just a release updates of 300 pages. Right now, it's thousands of pages. But it's absolutely worth to stay on board with all those kind of features coming up because let's say Salesforce is developing more and more and more nice features, and so far, really looking forward to work.
Reading the release notes is part of almost refactoring of keeping your org clean.
Also this, of course, sometimes you figure out that you have built something what you can right now do with standard functionalities, which is much more easier and much more faster to execute, or even you figure out that the problem you're hunting for since 2 years, you have right now a new measurement in place, a new KPI in place where you can see it where it is coming from, right? So for even this could be then sometimes eye-opening, because the metadata API is developed furthermore, right? And it's giving more and more insights into the org. And so for this then giving you this kind of insights you sometimes need to optimize your org.
Thank you very much. Okay, then have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.